betrayed by the people she loved. The Rowan Ford case, trigger warning. Rowan Demia Ford was born April 11, 1998 to her mother Colleen and her father who is unknown. Now Colleen would later remarry a man named David Spears and he would become Rowan's stepfather. Now David had a best friend named Christopher Collins and the two were very close. They even worked at the same job. In the summer of 2007, Chris would even move in with the family, sleeping in their basement. He lived with them for over 7 months. So Chris basically became a part of the family and Rowan would even call him Uncle Chris. Rowan loved Chris and she looked up to him. So in late October, Chris moved out of their house into a camper on his family's property, but he only lived about 10 minutes away. So on November 2nd, just a couple of weeks after Chris had moved out, Chris, David, and another mutual friend who they worked with, named Nathan, decided to hang out together. The three men went to the liquor store to buy a couple of six-packs, and then they all came back to David's house to hang out and play pool. Now on this night, Colleen had to work night shift, so she left for work, leaving Rowan home alone with these three men. Trust me, I know, you ain't even gotta say it. What the hell? So throughout the night, Chris, David, and Nathan continue to drink and party as Rowan watches TV until she falls asleep on her bedroom floor. So at some point in the night, Chris asks Nathan if he'll take him home, and Nathan agrees. So the three men get in the truck and they leave, leaving Rowan at home by herself asleep in her bedroom. They again stop by the store to purchase more alcohol and then continue on to Chris's house where they hung out for a little while. Nathan and David leave Chris at his house and they head back towards David's house. So Nathan drops David off around midnight and then Nathan goes home as well. So Colleen gets home from work the next morning around 9:30 and as she's walking through the house, she realizes Rowan's not there. So Colleen wakes David up and asks him, where's Rowan? And David says that Rowan is staying at a friend's house. Colleen asks, what friend? And David says he doesn't know their name, but he knows Rowan is with them and she's okay. Now instead of calling the police, Colleen waits around to see if these people will drop Rowan off. But as the day goes on, Colleen becomes more and more concerned because her daughter has still not been brought home yet. So finally, late in the evening, Colleen contacts the Newton County Sheriff's Department and reports her daughter missing. This is when David changes his story. He tells the police that when he and his friends left, Rowan was asleep in her room. She was just fine. But when he got home at midnight, he didn't check on her, so he didn't know if she was home or not at that time. So the police launch a large-scale search for Rowan, and they've got more than 100 people on the ground with dogs doing everything they can to find her. They're checking all the wooded areas and ponds and questioning all the neighbors and friends of the family. So during the search, David's crying crocodile tears and acting really weird. So now David, Chris, and Nathan all become persons of interest because they were the last ones to see Rowan alive. So the police questioned their friend Nathan, and Nathan says, look, when I dropped David off, I left. I don't know what happened. And Chris said the same thing. Look, when they dropped me off, I don't know what they did, but David's her stepdad. He lives there. He would have been the last one to see her alive, so you need to talk to David. So now the police focused on David because he was the last one to see her, and he told so many conflicting stories. Now it turns out Chris was really good friends with the local police chief named Mr. Clark. And while driving through a parking lot, Chris flagged the police chief down and excitedly told him about Rowan's disappearance. Mr. Clark said that Chris seemed almost giddy. So the police chief thought Chris's behavior was very strange. So the police chief told the FBI, who was already on site, look, I've known this man for 18 years. He lived with the family. He's not acting like himself. Something's going on, like he's involved. I know it. So as the days went by, the police chief kept pushing Chris for more information. Chris kept insisting he loved Rowan, he would never hurt her, and he wants to find her, and he's been helping with the search. Now to prove his innocence, Chris came in willingly and gave a DNA sample. Chris starts pointing the finger at David, claiming David lied about his alibi that night. So now police believe that David hurt Rowan and Chris knew about it. The police chief knew Chris was about to break, so he set up another time for them to sit down and talk, but before they could, Rowan's body was found. Now let me give you a big trigger warning because you're going to need it. November 9th, after a long week of searching, Rowan's body was found at the bottom of a sinkhole known as Fox Cave. The sinkhole was 20 to 30 feet from the road in a heavily wooded area. Rowan was nude from the waist down except for one sock, and she had a ligature mark around her neck. There was catastrophic trauma to her lower region because she had been violently SA'd. I can't go into detail, but the coroner said she had catastrophic tissue damage. Think of the Cherished Periwinkle case. If you know, you know. Rowan's body was covered with leaves and debris. Whoever did this did not want her to be found right away. So the FBI told the police chief to find Chris and let him know they found Rowan's body and push him for more information. At this time, everyone was under the impression that Chris was covering up for David. So they finally meet up, and Chris says that he's really worried the townspeople are going to take matters into their own hands because they think he's involved with this. The police chief told Chris, look, I can't follow you around protecting you 24 hours a day. I can't guarantee your safety. He said, look, we already found her body, so you may as well tell me what you know about this. And then Chris shocked his longtime friend, the police chief, by what he did next. Chris then held his arms out and said, you're going to want to cuff me when you hear what I got to say. Chris said as soon as they dropped him off at his house and left, he jumped in his truck and went straight back to David's house. Chris knew David and Nathan were taking the back roads back to David's house, so if he took the main road, he would get there faster and beat the two men there. Chris said he drove so fast he arrived at David's home within minutes. He quickly snuck into the house, used the bathroom, found Rowan asleep on her bedroom floor, gently picked her up, and then put her in his pickup truck and left. This next part is just so brutal, it's so hard to even say it. He brought her back to his house, took her to his bedroom, removed her pajama bottoms and underwear, and then brutally essayed her. Chris said as soon as he started, she abruptly woke up and was scared to death. She started crying, screaming, and panicking. I mean, this guy was over 6'8", 300 fucking pounds. She was probably terrified out of her mind. He claims he kept the lights off and didn't speak throughout the ordeal because he didn't want her to recognize him so he could take her back home and just leave her there safe and sound and nobody would know. He walked her outside and they were heading towards his truck because he was going to take her back home, right? And that when she turned around and looked at him, she freaked out. And that was when he freaked out and decided that he had to unalive her because she had recognized him. But I don't believe him. I don't think he ever intended on taking her back home. Chris found some rope and brutally unalived her right there in the yard. He said he realized he was in a lot of trouble and put Rowan's body in the bed of his pickup truck and planned to dispose of her body off the Murray Bridge, but rejected that idea because he thought her body would be found sooner. So he drove around for a while and considered his options, and then he decided to go to Fox Cave, and then that's where he left her in the sinkhole. He said he covered her body with limbs and debris to make sure nobody would find her anytime soon. So Chris put her pajama bottoms, her underwear, and the rope he used to unalive her in a wood stove, everything but the mattress because he couldn't fit that in. Then he rolled up the mattress and put it into a 55-gallon drum and used it as a burn barrel. But then he got worried that someone would spot the fire, so he drove the barrel inside of the barn and set the items on fire there. On the way back to the police department, Chris rode in the front seat, uncuffed, smoking a cigarette, talking with his friend like nothing had happened. That was when the police chief realized he didn't know his longtime friend at all. He was just another cold-blooded killer. So Chris was transported to Berry County Sheriff's Department where he gave another videotaped statement after being advised of his rights. Christopher said that he had been advised of his rights several times throughout the week. He repeated the same series of events during the interview and said that he felt guilty and remorseful and claimed that he'd been bawling like a baby over this because he loved her. He loved Rowan so much. Yeah, he loved her so much he drove her body around in the back of his truck all night looking for the perfect place to dump her body out like trash. I think Chris was essaying her the whole time he stayed in that house, and then when he moved out, he couldn't do it anymore, so he snapped. Later in court, Chris's defense attorney claimed he only confessed because his friend, the police chief, coerced him into it, and it was a conflict of interest. Chris was sentenced to death, but he appealed that ruling, but then the judge upheld that ruling, so he still sits on death row to this day. What a waste of taxpayers' dollars. Don't y'all think it's about time we get this show on the road? So it seems like the story is over, right? Wrong. Remember her stepfather, David? Well, he confessed to police that he was there and he participated in her murder. David told police that he essayed Rowan, watched Chris unalive her, and helped Chris dispose of her body that night. Then David said he knew he was there and he knew he did it, but he couldn't remember doing it. The prosecutors said they believed David gave a false confession. He believes the police intimidated David so much during his interrogation, he made a false confession. Prosecutors said he could not, with a good conscience, prosecute David without any evidence. But there is evidence against David that says he was involved that night. Then they said if they went after David, it would mess up the case they have against Chris, and they weren't going to do that. But here's the problem, Prosecutor Johnny Cox, and I swear to God that's his name. Why did David lie to his wife and make up all those fake stories about where she was that morning if he's innocent? He did that long before the police got involved. So David pled guilty to child endangerment and hindering a prosecution and was sentenced to 11 years in prison with 5 years time served. Now let's take a moment to remember 9-year-old Rowan Ford. Her family said she was really sweet and tender-hearted and liked everyone. Rowan was a very active member at Stella Baptist Church, and let me tell you, she was loved there. Her pastor said she was always early, sitting on the steps waiting for him, greeting each member as they came through the door. She was a team member in Angel Food Ministries and helped with Bible school every year. She loved Sunday school class and was always helping out with the younger children. Rowan loved church music. Her favorite song was Old Rugged Cross. Her favorite show was Hannah Montana. She adored Miley Cyrus, and she loved reading, especially books about cats. Her family said she was so proud of herself because she had just learned how to swim that summer. One of her favorite things to do was go out and ride her bicycle. Rowan's teacher said honestly, she was an angel in class. She was the best student any teacher could ask for. Parents, don't underestimate these predators. They'll prey on your children right under your nose.